Welcome to Norris Code, the #1 podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I am your host and producer. My name is James Pagashnik. Thank you guys so much for listening. And at the other end of the tin cannon string, we have our analyst and co-host. You know him from numerous blogs and podcasts around the internet, most notably from theathletic.com. He is Mr. Useful Human, Arif Hassan. Arif, are you done gut laughing at the Minnesota United Football Club yet?
You shouldn't have brought it up.
So the last few minutes, so we do a pre-show thing. We do this pre-show thing. We talk about a couple of random things, maybe even what happened on the Monday night game. Just sometimes it's Patreon stuff, sometimes it's not. And we go over the show notes. And as we're going over the show notes, Arif notices there's a question missing. And goes into the Twitter feed and notices there's a message about the Minnesota United Football Club. And it's so perfectly timed.
I read the first message first. Which is not typically, because, in Twitter, they give you the most recent message. So it was a message sent 26 minutes before we recorded. Minnesota United Football Club up 2-0 versus Seattle with 20 minutes left, and the win will send them to the Cup. Is it possible that they haven't been in Minnesota long enough to be cursed? Can I have hope? And then notification. Never mind. Lost 2-3 to Seattle.
And that caused Arif to die. For the second straight episode, Arif has died, and I'm stuck here doing his damn eulogy. It's not fair. There has just been cackles of laughter as he goes through the tweets. And we feel bad for all of these people, especially Eric Thompson, a number of these people just overwhelmingly upset and sad and everything. And Arif is just dying here.
This is so funny. If you can't laugh, you're crying. I mean, that's it. Those are your two options,
and
right?
Sometimes you laugh until you cry. which is what's happening to Arif right now, who's going to struggle going through any of the show notes right now. Yes.
Real tears. This is so good. Because also the Panthers game, or not the Panthers game, the Jaguars game, they're big cats, who cares? The Jaguars game also made me laugh, cry in the press box, which I think Will Raggets noted as I was watching the game, because, man, sports are so dumb. If you can't laugh at how stupid sports are, then, I mean, they're just going to hurt you. It's either funny or painful, usually both. But if you can't laugh, it's the worst time ever.
If you can't laugh, you basically have destroyed any sort of like ownership over the moment. You have to laugh in order to gain some sort of footing on it. Like you have to like be able to put a stamp on it. If you looked at the second missed extra point by Dan Bailey and didn't laugh out loud maniacally, then you have anger issues.
Yeah, really. I mean, if you're so like, I'm not saying you shouldn't be invested in the Vikings, otherwise you wouldn't be listening to this podcast and I wouldn't have a job. Please be invested in the Vikings. But like, man, you can't be so seriously invested in something that you don't control the outcome of so much that it ruins your emotional health without at least being able to temper it with recognizing how absurd things are. Like, you have to recognize how absurd these things are.
I haven't smoked in a number of years, and I was craving a cigarette at the end of that game. Like, I had a pen in my hand, and I was ashing it out of habit. Like, I'm just losing it over how dumb everything is. And I wasn't, it's not that I was, obviously, I want Minnesota to win everything, but I'm just sitting there just like, this is so stupid. Like, I'm trying to look at it like somebody who's, Xanaxed out and can't have emotions at that point. I'm just trying to just sit and the same way that I treat like air travel. Is the same way I've been treating the last two Vikings games. I feel like in the case of airline stuff, I actually do have to take something to like a Xanax or something, and like I just kind of mellow out and just lie back in the chair and just don't talk to anyone, look at my phone, respond to messages, and just try to weather the storm. And that's all you could really do over the last two games was just weather the storm of whatever the hell was happening in Minnesota those last two games. It was kind of
winning
ridiculous.
helps.
Oh, winning helps. Don't get me wrong. And this was the closest to not winning. That wasn't a tie that the Vikings could have done in 2 games. So this was... I had said by the end of it, I think I'd even tweeted out, is like, I don't know how you cover this game in, like, journalistically. It's a bit like the bike race in Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas from Hunter S. Thompson. Like, I'd even put, like, we put a fake show name at the top of every show note, and this one was the quote. It was like, the idea of trying to cover this race in any conventional press sense was absurd, and that's what we're going to deal with today. So we have some stuff to talk about. Before we do, I want to thank you guys so much for listening. Welcome to the madness that is the Jaguars recap. We promise not to go 2 hours on the Jaguars recap itself. Nobody wants to relive that game. So we got a couple things we're going to talk about it. So we'll make it clear and make it about as quick as we can. But before that, thank you guys so much for listening. We do have a special live show happening this Thursday. Again, this coming Thursday, December 10th at 7 p.m. Central. I will be posting the link over on Patreon. You do need to be a Patreon subscriber in order to join the live show. And we're going to be doing the preview of the Bucs game. So we're going to have the questions up. We'll be doing some Q&A as well from actual listeners during the preview. So, or during the mailbag of the live show. So we're trying to have this be as live showy as possible. This is the first time we've tried it over Zoom. We're hopeful that this isn't going to turn out to be terrible. So join Patreon and prove me wrong. Or prove me right, whichever.
Make it terrible. I dare you.
I dare you to disrupt this in a way that isn't solved by me muting your mic. That sort of thing. So
pay us money. I dare you.
I don't know who I expected to upset in this room full of people that give me money in order to be able to access this link. But yeah, go over to patreon.com/Norse Code. The link will be posted on Thursday morning in order for you to actually access the room. It'll start up at 7 o'clock on Thursday, December 10th, which is before the Thursday night football kickoff. So we'll be talking a bit about the game that's going on. We'll be talking about the preview of the Bucs game and doing a mailbag section as well. So also, if you join, this is recorded. This will be released as an actual episode. So if you join and ask a question, your likeness, whatever, will be a part of this episode. So use that.
Yeah, I don't know if you see that as a deterrent or
apparently Don from Ohio is sending me a Christmas gift that I'm supposed to open on air, and he told me about it.
He told you. Okay.
Yeah, it wasn't, just you giving him my address for fun. So you
weren't supposed to know why I got the address. It was just supposed to be a question out of nowhere, and then you would comply. And then you'd find out, a week later.
I just assumed you were returning something to me, and you're just like, screw it, I can't have this in my house anymore. So
that's actually not a bad idea. I've got a couple of things I should send back to you.
Yeah. So anyway, patreon.com/Norse Code. The live show is next Thursday, this coming Thursday, December 10th at 7 p.m. Central U.S. time. So if you're interested, go ahead and head on over there. Also, we will be doing a live watch along for the January 3rd Lions game as well. We will also be doing that on Zoom. That is also through Patreon only. So again, if you're interested in such things, head over there. The links will be posted before the actual events themselves. Check it out. We have a lot of fun. And the watch along we had was fantastic for the Monday night game. We had Dusty on for a little bit, so I'm going to see if I can get his self to be roasted early that particular day. I don't know if it's going to be possible, but we'll see. So, the Jaguars game. I have this long string of notes, but before we do any of these, let's go to the names that were suggested for this episode. Once a year, maybe twice a year, I ask the Norse Code Twitter audience, what should I name this particular episode? because it seems so absurd or so terrible or so nuts. I need some suggestions, and I might have found one or two in here that I really like.
Okay, I'm going to be honest. I read through these. Most of them are bad, and you should all feel ashamed.
However, there are a few just shining stars. Arif hates our beginning one, which was Down to the Jaguar.
Awful.
Vikes Coaster.
It's okay.
Define In the Hunt.
That one was good, although I have to be completely honest. My first read through of these show notes, I thought this was a show note that James wanted me to comment on. So keep that in mind.
And you're like, despite the Vikings' best efforts.
I like that one.
Overpromise and underdeliver.
It applies to way too many games.
Pyretic Victory. I like that one.
It's Pyrrhic Victory.
Pyrrhic.
Right?
Sorry, yes.
Yeah, Victory on Fire. It comes from like a Roman battle, which might have actually occurred near a city like Pyrrhus or something like that. But like they won the battle, but they lost so many men that it was like it wasn't even worth winning.
Yeah, it was like you won, but at what cost, sort of thing.
Yeah.
Driving mixed Expazy.
That's good. It reads better than it comes out aloud, but it's good.
I Told You So, which is a reference to me reminding the Norse Code audience repeatedly never to underestimate the Vikings' ability to play down to their opponent.
Our guest said that too. I was like, how could the Jaguars possibly win? And the guest was like, well, I'm never going to like put it past the Vikings to do something stupid. And I was like, all right.
Like, actually, okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Jaguar, I guess we'll take it. The Art of Underperforming.
That's okay.
I like that one. Interstellar, because if you're high as hell, neither of these things make sense. Holding 78 offense.
That's good.
Unbailable.
Well, unbelievable.
I'm not gonna no.
There's a V in. Yeah.
Yeah. Somehow we're not tanking for Trevor. The image with the guy with his hands up in the air where it says, I guess.
Okay, so in the show notes, it's just the two words, I guess. And I was like, actually, I'd prefer it if it was the image. So I'm glad someone just sent the image.
The Vikings are bad, but the Jags are worse.
Yeah, okay.
The Pathetic Game.
Okay.
But like, why though?
I like that one because it has like cosmic implications.
You get a miss and you get a miss. Everyone gets a miss.
That's okay.
Hot Potato. Make It Hurt So Good. And then I think this was Slaby who said, I would suggest going for the Jaguar, but I like the meta commentary of this game didn't deserve a catchy title.
I like that, yeah.
Yeah. So this was, and you should have known. You should have known from the opening possession that something was going to happen here that was going to be both memorable and incredibly stupid. Possibly memorable because it was incredibly stupid. And that was the ricochet pass that turned into a touchdown from Mike Glennon to his receiver in a way that I don't think I've ever seen a catch happen in such a way. Like that really did feel like Madden physics the moment it bounced off of the was that Boyd's hands?
Yeah, it was out of Boyd's hands into Laviska Shenault's. Which, man, that, I mean, when I first saw it, I didn't even realize it was a touchdown because I had my binoculars on Boyd and I just saw him react and I was like, yeah, that's too bad. And then I look up and the press box is like, wow, I can't believe the Vikings gave up a touchdown that quickly. And I was like, they gave up a what? Huh? How?
Yeah,
I saw that ball.
It didn't make any sense. And then the TV people didn't do a full viewing of it until way later It's like, no, I want that. Like they showed the bounce on TV, but they didn't show the reception part of that for a while. And so I'm just sitting like, no, I want to see how that.
They didn't show the reception part either.
No, Not on the replay, no. All they wanted to
Wow.
show was the bounce off the receiver. After like after the Vikings had the ball, then they showed the full thing. But for the next couple minutes, you actually did have to go onto Twitter to find out what the hell just happened. It was ridiculous. You knew you were in for something special when that's the way you start, and because they missed the extra point.
Right, yeah. You knew it was going to be a wild ride as soon as that was the score, and then they missed the extra point.
Yeah, that's and I've just accepted that missed extra points are my brand at this at this particular juncture. But I think you could argue there was an excessive amount. Maybe there was too many missed extra points in this game
based on your mentions.
Yeah, I think this is I think this is too much. What a weird game. All right, so I'm just going to list a couple of these because we're not going to go in depth on them, but these were some of the story of the game. You know, Dantzler had a pick in the middle of the second quarter. It looked like Glennon was trying to throw to Dantzler all day, and Dantzler just managed to pick up that interception in the middle of the second.
Yeah, I mean, he got targeted 7 times, allowed 1 reception, was able to grab a pick, which, I mean, I want to say, I mean, he also helped create it. I thought that was a great individual effort from him. And he had a great pass deflection as well on the sideline. So really great day for him. I think PFF gave him like a 93 grade. I might feature him on my players of the week. That's how good his game was. But yeah, I mean, that was a remarkable game highlighted by that pick.
Yeah, that was fantastic. Thielen had a really nice touchdown in there too. It seemed like Thielen was the one that was in charge for receiving in the first half, and they kind of transitioned more into Justin Jefferson in the second. Not like it was an intentional thing. Just it seemed like the more catches were going to Thielen in the first half than to Jefferson, and then Jefferson ended up doing more of the bulk of the work in the second half.
Yeah, I was kind of surprised that at the end of the game, Jefferson actually ended up with both more targets and more catches than Thielen because, you know, first impressions are kind of strong. And I had just been under the impression that Thielen had built up such a lead in both targets and receptions that by the end of the game, even with 120 receiving yards, that Jefferson wouldn't have had as many targets as Thielen. But he came out with 12 targets, so you know, they automatically win according to some people.
Well, that's the ratio apparently.
Yeah, that's the ratio.
Somewhere in this game, and I missed it in my recap somehow. Dan Bailey missed 2 extra points, and that's incredibly noteworthy. Not just because of the Norse Code Fantasy League, which we all know, love, and yes, there were people who started him. You idiots. But Dan Bailey ends up missing 2 extra points, and just that's apparently something that we get to worry about. At least, you know, maybe next week completely rights the ship or whatever, but it's like it moved on from the thing that was the problem in special teams, which was the long snapping, into the kicker now. So this is kind of how fragile we can feel about kickers in Minnesota. Because if a kicker makes every single kick, there's not a single Vikings fan in existence who's not nervous as hell come playoffs or something like that. Oh, he's due.
Because of that fact, right?
He's due.
Like, right. And like, we've seen that, right? But also, any missed kick is evidence for you to be worried about missed kicks. Like, there's got to be, like, just this, like, tiny line of like near perfect that a kicker has to run in order for Minnesotans to feel somewhat confident. And even then, like if the announcer says anything about that kicker being good, your confidence like evaporates. Like there's no way a kicker can convince you, even though Dan Bailey has been pretty good for like 2.5 years, right? Because the first half year was pretty rough. Even though he's been pretty good for Minnesota, it's just like, I don't know. he's old, right? Oh my God, he just missed an extra point. We're done for. We're done for.
Just absolutely ridiculous. We had some question a couple of months ago, maybe it was a couple of years ago, where it was like, would you have a number one, or would you put in the first round, would you pick up a kicker if it meant he was going to be absolutely perfect at his job within like 55 yards for the next 15 years? And I think both of us went, yeah, I think that, you know, it would be tough to sell at the time, But if that's what ends up turning out, I think that's fine. I think we could, like, as a fan base, just, accept that bit of good luck.
Yeah.
Just ridiculous. Okay. So Dan Bailey ends up missing the 2 extra points. At some point, both the Vikings and the Jags decided to open up 2-minute drills with a run. And I realized this worked last week, but what? Why? Why is this something that we're just doing now?
Yeah, I don't get. I talked about it last week. I don't want to go into it in detail every single time it happens because it's going to happen every single time. But like you forfeit your ability to dynamically manage the clock in a situation that's more advantageous to you, because you would rather either have like the flexibility to have a lot of time or not that much time inside your opponent's 40, and then you can manage the clock with runs or whatever. If you start managing the clock back there, you got no like leeway or wiggle room to run a series or sets of plays the closer you get to their red zone. And so you won't have the time to choose between a pass and a run. And then also like the other like benefit is that runs get you fewer yards anyway. So like, what are you doing? Like, it's not as if the opposing defense is so poorly set up to defend the run that you're going to get more yards running. Like, you're not at that point yet. So I don't understand it. It hasn't really worked for the Vikings just in terms of what that first play provides you. I don't understand. And there've been like runs for loss in this situation too.
I'm just trying to figure out if there's like some sort of a reason. Like Kirk Cousins is just sitting there just going, I work better on a moving clock. I don't like the stopped clock thing. So just let's just pedal off like 15 seconds because that's how long it's going to take to get set. Our first play is just to get that clock going. Nothing else.
Yeah. To get our blood pumping, to get that clock going down, so I can get a sense of urgency.
I'm not just going to kneel because we're going to lose yardage there. I want them to try to move it at least a yard moving forward, running into a brick wall, and then we're going to get set and play the real down that we want to play. It's like, really? That's it seemed like that for a bit. It was just kind of ridiculous. You know what I didn't put in the show notes, which I might as well mention here, is the Kirk Cousin and one mixtape where the ball ended up going between his legs. And
betwixt the wickets.
Yeah. He ends up going between each of his legs, and then he ends up tossing the completion. Just this game really did have it all. So we had running the 2-minute drill. Let's just skip to a conversation point that we started having pre-show, and I think we have all the stats that we need for this now. There was a pick six to start the second half. Now, I want to be clear here. I was ready to give up on the Vikings entirely if the next play from scrimmage was going to be another pick six or a fumble six into the, like, I was ready to be done. I was ready to like do a face-off thing with Dusty or just pay Dusty to do the rest of the year. Like I was just ready to walk off into the sunset, Jared Allen style. I wanted nothing to do with anything at that point. I was just I laughed so hard at that pick six to start the third quarter. Arif, you have done some data diving on this. What does it say about the Vikings in the first minute of the second half?
Yeah, so in the first minute of the second half, the first minute of the third quarter, I wanted to see if the Vikings were, say, uniquely bad in the NFL. And it will not surprise you that they are. They have a 13% turnover rate in the first minute of the third quarter. So they've run 31 plays and they've had 4 turnovers. So there's that pick six, the 2 fumbles against Carolina, another interception that I don't have like in front of me right now. They've run the ball 13 times. They've thrown the ball 7 times. They've taken 2 sacks. So yeah, it's really remarkably bad. And these stats do not include the opening kickoff or opening of the second half kickoff that Cordero Patterson returned for a touchdown either. And so the data would suggest that the Vikings are the worst team in the NFL at the first minute of the third quarter. I don't know how that happens, and a lot of it is like turnover based, so it's not likely to repeat. but like, man, that's pretty bad. It's like you can't do much about that.
What was the rate on that to start this off? What was the rate that the Vikings have?
So the rate is the turnover rate is 13% of all plays, and then they average 3.1 yards per play, which, by the way, is not the lowest in the NFL in the first minute of the second half. A number of teams have a lower yards per play. None of them have a higher turnover rate, of course. So 3.1 yards per play, obviously that's pretty bad. But San Francisco averages 1.6, and so do the Jets. So that's obviously substantially worse.
That's some good company to be in.
Yeah, no, that's great company. Are there any good teams here? Well, Buffalo, Seattle. That's about it. Yeah, those are the only good teams there. Yeah, just brutal. And at least like the teams that have a low yards per play, a lot of them, well, obviously they all have lower turnover rates, but a lot of them have high first down ratios, like the Giants, which are obviously a great team to be in the company of. They've got a 17% first down rate. The Vikings decidedly do not. So yeah, all of that plus the kickoff return they allowed for a touchdown. The only, I think, kickoff return touchdown allowed by any team to start the second half, I want to say, because there's just not that many of them. Aaron Jones up the middle, 75 yards. Russell Wilson complete pass to Jacob Hollister. Dan Bailey kicks off 69 yards. Nice return by Cordell Patterson. Touchdown. So yeah, that's the only opening second half touchdown kickoff return. So good job, Vikings.
Just all sorts of fun there. So after that bit of insanity, Jefferson really started to come alive, and my man, and again, part of my brand, and I seem to get all sorts of ats whenever it happens. CJ Ham has the longest touchdown of his career. I believe that was a 12-yard pass that he caught, beautifully run in by CJ Ham.
Yeah, he was just wide open. How could you not throw to him? I think open to the left side. There was just no coverage on him. Dump it off. Happy to get the first down, and then it turns out there was much more available than a first down on that play. He ends up getting the touchdown. Really great.
He looked about as happy as I think he's ever been in his life at that particular moment. Just, oh my God, I made it into the end zone.
Yeah, right. You'd have to imagine.
I'm great. Then shortly thereafter, Glennon ends up fumbling near the end of the third quarter, and which sets up the Vikings in a good way in order to potentially score. So Glennon ends up fumbling, and then the Vikings get down to the 2-yard line. And in true Vikings fashion, everybody loves nostalgia, everybody loves a good throwback, whatever. Cook fumbles again at the 2. We're just, really? That's
absolutely phenomenal. And if you didn't give up like at the top of the third quarter, I could forgive you for giving up there. Like, oh my God.
There was reason to believe you were not going to be rewarded for your pain. I watched the whole thing, and I'm not sure that I was rewarded for my pain, but I definitely did make it through the game. The Cook fumble really did just is. I realize that Vikings fans are a bit snake bit when it comes to running back fumbles because of our ex. And our ex is still in the league and is still fumbling at really dumb times. And so the Vikings fans are just used to their their running back fumbling. They're also used to their quarterback fumbling, quite frankly. But we're just not going to talk about that right now. We're going to talk about Dalvin Cook. Does Dalvin Cook have a real fumble problem?
I think that's like a pretty fair question. So his fumble rate this year is, I think we can remember the 3 fumbles that he had in the 3 prior games a little bit. Plus he doesn't get charged for this fumble, although I do think it's probably his fault, just based off of what they said after the presser and what it looked like he was doing. So if we charge him for this fumble and we take a look at his total fumbles over the course of his career, you say, okay, 11 plus the one that we're going to charge him here, 12. That's, not too many over the course of 4 years, but you have to remember he didn't play any full season. So it's it's 12 over 708 rushes. And that rate becomes a little bit concerning. It's not as concerning as Adrian Peterson, though. So 1.7%, which is what that is pretty high for running backs. It's not as high as some of Adrian Peterson's worst years, which I think was 1.9 or 2%. I'm going to take a look at that right now. But his fumble rate in his worst years, which let's say 2008, 2009 were his worst fumble years, which is where he developed that reputation. He had some fumble problems in addition to all of that. But let's say that's 363 plus 314. So that's 16 over 677. So that's a 2.4% rate. And then over the course of his career, he's had 48 fumbles. Plus, he did get charged for that one of the playoffs, but that doesn't get counted in his career statistics. So his career fumble rate is 1.5%. So right now, Dalvin Cook's career fumble rate is worse than Adrian Peterson's. But you have to remember that in 2010, 2011, everyone thought that he had solved his fumble problems because he'd only had one fumble in each of those years. So he does pop up again. He had 4 the next year, 5 the year after that. He missed 2014 due to injury. And then he had 7 in 2015, which is like just awful. But yeah, his fumble rate is Dalvin Cook's fumble rate is pretty bad, but it's not as bad as kind of that worst of Adrian Peterson or the bulk of what Vikings fans remember of Adrian Peterson. So that middle section, he had 34 fumbles and let's see, he only had 208 carries in 2011. Oh yeah, because he got hurt. I was like, oh, what happened in 2011?
Oh, as it turns out, FedEx Field happened, which made sense as to why he wanted to, go play there for 8 games a year.
Deshaun Gomez happened, yeah. Remember, because he was like pulling at his ankle.
Yep.
Yeah. So for the bulk of his Vikings career, 1.58. So yeah, the worst of Adrian Peterson's over 2%. Right now, Dalvin Cook's career is about 1.6%. The majority of Adrian Peterson's time with the Vikings is about 1.6%. So I think league-wide, you compare it to the rest of the league, Dalvin Cook's fumble issue is a fairly significant problem. And you can't really compare it to Amir Abdullah because a lot of his fumbles happen on kickoff returns, and the fumble rate league-wide on kickoff returns is just much larger. So that's not really comparable. But, you compare Dalvin Cook against the rest of the league, and you'll probably find that he's got a significantly worse fumbling problem than most running backs. Yeah.
Just it's one of those things that you're stuck with now. This is who you brought to the dance. This is who you paid. This is
and some of his fumbles, I would say, he broke his collarbone on one of them. So I'm like, I don't want to
Well, yes.
But yeah, I agree. This it's just baked in now. Yeah.
Yeah. So what happens after that fumble where the Jags get the ball at the 2? They have a safety called against them.
And it was incredible.
And anybody who was thinking, including yourself, that it'd be nice to get those 2 points back for the 2 missed extra points with a safety, well, the Vikings got their wish. So,
incredible tweet by me. Good timing.
Good. I wanted to point that out and give you a small win there. So we have that. The sacks start to pile up on Kirk Cousins, and when Jacksonville gets the ball, they fumble again, leading to the Vikings being up 8 with 2 minutes and 54 seconds left.
Yeah, so that's it. They win.
Yep,
you don't have to worry about it.
Nothing else. The ballots, just everything stopped. We stopped counting. It was fine. Vikings up 8, 2:54 left. So of course Jacksonville scores and hits the 2-point conversion, because why not? And just a series.
that's sigh.
This is where everything went off the rails, and I don't mean necessarily in the worst possible ways, injuries and whatnot. This is just where the game decided to like somebody was spamming the button in Buffalo Wild Wings to make the game go long. Like it felt like anything was possible at this particular moment. An asteroid could have hit the field and I would have gone, yeah, that makes sense. Like it's not
Yeah.
anything with anything being possible through the power of Ben DiNucci. Anything was possible in this particular game. It was just ridiculous. So there was a kick out of bounds, and then the 3rd-and-1 bomb by Kirk Cousins with 20 seconds left before Dan Bailey was going to try to hit a field goal, which would have been within his range. But there was a 3rd-and-1 bomb by Kirk Cousins out to Adam Thielen, and it looked like there were other options. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, with we just had 23 seconds left.
It was
right?
about 23 seconds left. There was a 3rd-and-1 bomb that seemed questionable.
I don't want to beg Kirk Cousins for being ready to finally take some risks, because that first half he wasn't taking very many risks at all. But then the second half started, he ends up taking a lot of risks that end up working out because the receiver core is pretty good. But yeah, there's 23 seconds left, so you can't you can't rest on your laurels just because there's not a lot of ways to get closer to the end zone. But yeah, Cousins lets go of the ball right away, so it's not as if he knows necessarily who's going to be open. He just knows who has one-on-one matchups. So Chad Beebe is there underneath, and he's obviously he's going to get a first down. He's right there. The only issue, of course, is the Vikings don't have a timeout. That's not a huge issue though, because if they throw it to Beebe and Beebe catches it, they do have enough time to. It's 23 seconds, right?
You can
they
clock
do have
that.
enough.
Yeah.
Yeah, they do have enough time to spike the ball and set up a pretty, I shouldn't say easy, a pretty simple field goal kick. But yeah, the issue is whether or not they've got the ability to hit Beebe. And the reason that you'd want him to take the Chad Beebe option there, or at least peek in that direction, is that if you take a look at the final shot of the play, you'll notice that Beebe is covered by a slot defender that's about 7 yards off of Beebe, about 6 yards off the line of scrimmage. And so if Beebe runs like a short hitch, which is exactly what he does, and none of the defensive linemen drop into coverage, and you don't have a buzzing linebacker, and none of those things ended up happening, then you've got that easy conversion. Now you're setting up Dan Bailey for about a 40, I want to say, was it additional 6 yards? So about a 45-yard field goal. And so that is a lot easier. But as soon as Cousins catches the ball from the shotgun snap, he takes one step back and he heaves it. And I get it. I get why he does that, because he's got single coverage on Adam Thielen. And I mean, Luke Barku was signed to the roster for the Jaguars 3 weeks ago. He's their Chris Jones. But actually he's playing worse. So I get why you would do that. It wasn't a particularly accurate throw. So that's part of it. If you take a look at kind of the slow-mo on Game Pass, you've got a little button to slow things down. Adam Thielen has got about a yard on him as soon as the ball is kind of at the apex and they're tracking it. And they keep going down, and Thielen has to slow down, which allows Barku to catch up. And so that's part of it too, is that it wasn't accurate enough for the type of throw that Cousins was trying. But yeah, the primary thing here is Cousins should have peeked at Beebe. Because there's nobody underneath. There's nobody there to catch the ball. There's nobody there to even deflect the ball. Beebe's at about, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So he's got 6, so it would be a 44-yard field goal. So he's got a couple of yards to go, and he's got another 6 yards between him and the defender. The defender was expecting Beebe to go deep for whatever reason, even though Beebe's only done that once in his career. I guess that was earlier in this game because he ran a post route. But it's just not what Beebe does. And so I'm surprised that he doesn't at least check the coverage there. He also has Justin Jefferson on one-on-one coverage, and I think we're at the point where we can say we might trust Jefferson a little bit more in these contested situations than Adam Thielen, so that's also something to take a look at. But yeah, Cousins probably, takes the wrong shot here. I think it is understandable. Obviously, you wish he takes the right shot, and you'd wish he'd have kind of the wherewithal to realize which one's the right shot, which one's the wrong shot. But Yeah, no timeouts left, 23 seconds left. There's not a ton of time to make a decision. If we're going to give credit for like Cousins for improving his kind of game winning, drive capability over this past year, we probably should include this in our conversation. That said, if Bailey hits a 51-yard field goal, Brady has gotten credit for game-winning drives where he has led the Patriots down 30 yards to set up a 50-yard field goal in the snow for Gostkowski. So it's also like you don't expect kickers to always make 50-yarders, but it's not as if, Cousins did just such a terrible job. I mean, on the previous two plays, he marched them down like long enough that they were able to get there. So that's part of it.
And you're hoping, part of the I felt like part of the reason why he made that throw down to Thielen is because this is a new player. Maybe that corner was going to do something stupid. You toss up balls like this hoping for PI sometimes. And that was the only reason I could think of as to why he thought that was a much better option than BB in the slot.
Yeah, I think so. I think here you do have to read the coverage. Just check it for a second, because the pressure is going to come fast. You have to get rid of the ball quickly. That's fine. I know you've got a one-step throw set up for Thielen, and you're gonna throw a rainbow because of that, which is what you typically do against cover zero if you're throwing vertical. But you should just peep it for a fraction of a second to see what that coverage is there, because if that ball is complete, that's not a touchdown, and a touchdown is not important either. And you run the risk of Thielen falling in bounds under contact, and you having to run up to the line of scrimmage with 18 seconds left and stuff. So there are risks to this throw as well. So yeah, I think that I understand the thought process. Again, if an opposing quarterback that you just saw last week engineer a game-winning drive, if an opposing quarterback throws at Chris Jones deep against their best receiver, if it's Mike Evans against Chris Jones this week with 23 seconds left and Brady throws it deep, are you happy? So I get it. I get why this matchup was chosen, but yeah, it would have been better to target BB.
It seems like anyway, unless the word from Zimmer himself was, don't put this in the kicker's hands, or rather on Dan Bailey's foot. Like if Bailey can kick it from the 2, let's have him kick it from the 2. Yeah, exactly. Like if we're on the goal line for this, great. But that, and of course Bailey ends up missing, which then leads to the Jags being able to have one real nice pass, being able to clock it, and then McLaughlin misses or comes up short on a 62-yarder, which is understandable, but he ends up missing as well, so we go to overtime, because the last thing that anyone needed here was more of this game.
Right. What did so someone tweeted out, I don't want to really call this bonus football, and so I just called it additional football.
Required, mandated even.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Chris Gates at Daily Norseman said mandatory football.
Jesus. It just I had been texting friends and been like, this is just I might even put it on Twitter. I was like, this game feels like just a clown car of why not? But the car was on fire, just barreling down the highway. And we got even more of the clown car as we started overtime, and there was a call on Justin Jefferson. Now Cousins was struggling right away. The Vikings won the toss. Cousins was struggling, but Cousins had a real nice throw to Jefferson, which ended up getting called for offensive pass interference. And there was some argument on the broadcast as to whether or not this actually was offensive pass interference, if he had extended his arm the whole way, or if this was just a normal wide receiver, just enough of a shove where it wouldn't have actually mattered. Was this actually offensive pass interference?
Okay, I'm going to take a quick look at the play again, just because live I thought it probably was. Then I saw some arguments of the timeline, and I didn't see a really good replay. So watching this here, first of all, you could call roughing the passer. I think Cousins got hit in the face, which I hate as a roughing the passer call, but if you're going to call it, let's see.
If you're going to call it, you might as well call it in the overtime of the game where both teams are trying their best in this one to not win. So you might as well just try to end this as quickly as you can.
Okay, I'm taking a look, and from the first replay angle, that is a terrible call. But that's just the first replay angle. Obviously, the guy's asking for the call. Oh boy. I, as a ref, would not call that. Let's just say that. So I think this is also part of being a rookie, is knowing what's going to get called and what's not. Because I think this is one of those things where Adam Thielen is actually just really good at these push-offs that don't get called, and to some extent Kyle Rudolph is as well, which I think Saints fans have become familiar with. But Adam Thielen is really good at figuring out whether or not a push-off is going to be called, and he does a really great job actually getting closer to the defensive back and pushing so that his arm isn't extended and he has more force in the push, and he can get back to his original position where he wants to be, and it doesn't look like offensive pass interference. Whereas here, I wouldn't say, Jefferson has his arm fully extended. Plus, full extension, I don't think is technically part of the rule. It's just kind of what refs look for as an indicator. I don't know. It's slow-mo, and slow-mo is obviously, it's going to alter our perception in ways that are not necessarily fair one way or the other. I would say that was probably not offensive pass interference, but I also think that it is somewhat understandable to call that. Especially fast. So I think that's part of that's a little bit, he's a rookie and he needs to understand, sometimes these things will look a certain way and get called if the ref has particular angles. And that's one thing that Adam Thielen's really good at. That's one thing that Stephon Diggs is pretty good at. I would say Thielen is a lot better at that. But yeah, that's just kind of like a trick of the trade for receivers. And I don't know, maybe Jefferson will learn it. A lot of receivers don't learn it, and they turn out to be excellent receivers regardless. So I would say that that's probably not.
I was going to say, this is something that if like a year from now, Jefferson probably wouldn't end up getting called for. He might have picked up something to avoid this sort of, like this specific sort of situation.
Right, yeah, exactly.
Maybe. Okay, so the Vikings won the toss and did nothing as a result of this penalty. And then the Jags take it over, and Harrison Smith has the interception. At what point were you gut laughing at the insanity? Because I lost count of the number of times that I got concerned looks from my wife when I was cackling.
Yeah, what was the play that Will Reggets tweeted that I was cackling in the press box? Was it that one? Probably not.
It might have a lot of plays. It might have been the missed Bailey field goal at the end of regulation, or near the end of regulation.
Just way too normal though. Let's see.
You know what would have been great is if McLaughlin.
It's the safety. It's because I called it.
Oh, that's what it was. Yeah. The safety.
Yeah.
I was gonna say if it was the McLaughlin miss, what would have been great is if McLaughlin would have hit the crossbar, and it would have bounced back, and then like. God said no. Okay, we're good. we're good. That's how that ends. Fine. So Harrison Smith with the interception. Cook takes over the game and runs this down. Now there was a moment here where I had a tweet that I was starting to type up because it seemed like the Vikings were about to do something incredibly stupid. It turns out they were, but in a different type of stupid. So what ended up happening was the Vikings ended up bringing it all the way down to, what was it, the 5 or like the 6 or something. The Vikings were making a big run at this. And it was 4th down and 1. And they decide to bring out the kicker. Or it was like 3rd down. And they bring out the kicker. It's like, really? I think it was 4th down. I was like, yeah, they bring up Dan Bailey.
They brought up so at the are you talking about the very end of the game?
Yes.
They brought up their kicker actually. I think on 2nd down for a second. With like 2 minutes left, it was 1st and 5. Dalvin Cook runs, and then the 2-minute warning happens. So there's a free timeout there. The kicking unit comes out onto the field. I want to say. and everyone is tweeting, "Oh, the kicking unit's out," and I was like, "Why are they doing that?" Oh, because if you miss the kick, maybe you get another shot. I actually don't remember the rule, but and also like mercifully it ends the game, so that's part of it. And then they brought up Dalvin Cook again at the 2-minute warning, and they run another play, and so they line up on 3rd and 1, and then they bring out the kicking unit again. No, on 3rd and 1 they line up to run a play, and then Dakota Dozier Falls starts, and then on 3rd and 5, they bring out the kicking unit because they just don't want to run another play, which I like.
Yeah. So it was 3rd and 1 or like 3rd and 1. It's like, really, this is what you're doing when your kicker has the yips and Dalvin Cook is eating their lunch. Like, this is what you're gonna do. Nothing bad has ever happened this year in a situation where the Vikings are like 3rd and 1 in the red zone. this close to.
You do avoid a potential Dalvin Cook fumble. So there's that.
Yeah, if you ignore the Seattle game, I mean, obviously that colors everything. But if you ignore the Seattle game for just a moment, nothing bad has happened to Dalvin Cook in the red zone like this. It would be absurd to think his luck would all of a sudden just run out. So fine, Dan Bailey ends up coming in. He ends up winning the game, is allowed to get to his car and go home. And we are all allowed to stop watching this terrible game.
Yeah, no one wanted a touchdown more than Dan Bailey.
Just, I don't even want to hit. I don't even kick an extra point. Just end this. Just put a bullet in it. Call it good. So all of this was kind of kick-started, and I apologize for a pun here, but really was not trying for it, despite the fact that you don't believe me. All of this was kind of forced into play because of an injury to Eric Kendricks. Was this something that was pregame, or was this just like Zimmer trying to make it so that the Jags were preparing for Kendricks to be coming out?
No, this was pregame because if they had wanted to play these games, it would actually not help them as much because they would have to keep someone they want inactive on the active list and reduce the number of people they have on their active list. So they would have to essentially, if they want that roster spot available to them for whatever reason, maybe play Tajay Sharp or have another linebacker available or something like that, they would have been able to put Kendricks on the inactive list and say, I forget who was inactive, but say Ryan Connolly would be promoted to the active list, so you'd have enough linebacker depth. I don't think it's worth it to kind of play that game. And they did actually show video of Eric Kendricks warming up and then kind of limping off the field during warmup. So it was very clearly after inactives were announced, the Vikings warmed up on the field. Kendricks' calf is just not feeling right, and so they just decided to shut him down for the game.
How big of a difference would Eric Kendricks have made in this game?
I mean, pretty huge. The Vikings linebackers, at least by my eyes, were pretty bad, right? like Eric Wilson had a moment or two in coverage, but even he got beat in coverage, and he's the coverage guy, right? Like he's the guy that should probably be a safety because he's so good at coverage. But yeah, I mean the run defense for the Vikings was pretty brutal. And they were lucky that they got such a great game from Cameron Dantzler. Otherwise, their coverage performance overall would just not have been all that great because he was really the only elite coverage defender. Like obviously Anthony Harris played well and Harrison Smith played really well, and you have that, but he was the only really good coverage defender. Eric Wilson got beat for 40, 50 yards. Chris Boyd got beat for about 70 yards. Todd Davis got beat for 40 odd yards. They were pretty bad in coverage. And then you factor in how bad they were against the run. Eric Wilson and Troy Dye got blown up a lot. They got run over by James Robinson a lot. They just don't have enough stopping power. And then Todd Davis does have stopping power. He does have the ability to bring force to bear as a run defender, but he takes such poor tackling angles that unless he's head on against the runner, we just don't actually get to see that. So the very first tackle of the game, that looked pretty good. But as the game went on, he just kept on missing tackles. PFF has him with 4 missed tackles for the game. That fits. That makes sense to me. he was just like awful at making sure that he could close down on James Robinson. So having Eric Kendricks instead of Todd Davis would have been huge. That I think that would have been the difference. I mean, it went to overtime, right? So any difference that was positive would have helped. So that would have been the difference in the game, and that would have gotten the Vikings the win. So yeah, really really just critical. Like and that ended up being the final piece where the Vikings front seven was completely different than last year's front seven. like right, because it's Linval, Joseph, Everson, Griffin, Danielle Hunter. I guess Shamar Stephen's the only difference, right? Then Shamar Stephen, and then Anthony Barr and Eric Hendricks and Ben Gideon for the first 5 games of the year. Only Shamar Stephen was available in that game, and he was the least important piece. And he had a bad game. Like him and Jaleel Johnson had just awful games.
Just uncomfortable is the best way I can put it for that particular game. It just kept going. For a game that you just wanted to end, all of a sudden it ends at 3:40, and you're just sitting around like, that's it? we can be done here? Oh, fantastic! This is wonderful. I don't even know what to do with myself now. This is absurd. What can you say about a team that has decided to run their young running back into the ground in order to beat...
Sorry, are we talking about the Jaguars or the Vikings?
We're talking about the Vikings at this point. I know, I had to question that too. But the Vikings leaned heavily, and I mean heavily, on Dalvin Cook here in order to win. You could argue that Dalvin Cook was making his MVP like candidacy known during that final drive when he was just eating up all of the yards. Like Dalvin Cook wanted this. Dalvin Cook willed this game for the Vikings. He willed the ball across the 50. He might have like given a pep talk to Dan Bailey. We don't know. But what we do know is that Dalvin Cook had a hell of a lot of attempts. And what we didn't see in the box score was anything for his backup, Boone.
Yeah, which you were pretty upset about.
I was confused. Why would you? Madison at least had 3 in the last game. Are you like, you have Amir Abdullah in there? You're not going to be utilizing Boone? I realize that Madison's in the hospital with appendicitis, with a ruptured appendix. But like, you're not going to give any carries to his backup here?
So, I mean, that didn't surprise me at all. I mean, I did a radio hit for some probably SiriusXM Fantasy, and they asked me about Mike Boone, and I was like, you shouldn't even be rostering him. We shouldn't be asking this question. If he's on like DraftKings for less than the minimum, like which I think is what, $3,000, then I don't know, maybe, but don't do it. Because they gave Alexander Madison 2 carries last week, something like that, right? And he's the backup they want, right? That guy's backup going in, I would be surprised if he got 2 carries, right? So he's either down to 1 or 0, and it turns out it's going to be 0. That's not shocking to me at all that they didn't give him any. What's more surprising is that Amir Abdullah got carries in place of, which I guess he only gets big plays, right? So I guess he shouldn't be too upset. But yeah, no, it wasn't really set up for that. Like if somehow in week 17 the Vikings are locked into their seed, which sounds like an impossible prospect at this point, maybe we'll see another big Mike Boone game, and all the DFS nerds can be super excited about that. But for the most part, no, absolutely not. I don't think that we were ever likely to see a huge. I shouldn't even say a huge, any Mike Boone usage at all.
I was expecting, 4 carries, maybe 5.
I don't know why. How much did Madison get 2 games ago? Because I'm just going to look up his career statistics or not. So he has 74 total attempts with the Vikings, which is more than I thought. 2 against Carolina, 1 against Dallas, 2 against Chicago. See? I don't know why you would expect 4 for Boone.
You know what? Color me wrong. I was expecting maybe 2 then. I something. Maybe just a shot of him waving on the sidelines. Just some usage of Boone. Maybe he's going out and getting snacks for the fellas. I don't know, but some usage.
Just like leave the stadium.
Like, all right, Matt's was I was able to get takeout from Matt's, so I got some Lucy's over here for you guys. Kirk, I know we're going into the third quarter. I don't need your hands all greasy for this. Something terrible is going to happen. You saw what happened last game. Nope, you you get yours after it's congealed. No, it just I can't. Fine. What can you? How do we wrap this up? Because I don't think that our listeners want us to go any more on this game. Can you just wrap it up with a little bit? Cousins had moments. Cook took over the game at the very end. Dan Bailey is apparently needing to go back to therapy. What do we got?
I'm not too worried about Bailey, which is something you say right before disaster, I suppose. But I mean, I think for the most part, he'll turn out fine. I'll say, quick things. Offensive line, Dakota Dozier was awful. The rest of them were not that bad. I mean, I would have liked to see more from Garrett Bradbury as a run blocker. That's where the Vikings kind of suffered a lot. Dalvin Cook didn't play all that poorly, but I would say that they definitely overused him because early on in the game, like you say, he took over the game late. That was especially in overtime. A couple of nifty cuts. I think he had a 10-yard run in there. But he averaged 3.75 yards a carry, and a lot of that, I think he averaged like 4.5 in the final drive in overtime. So a lot of that was his end game production. Early in the game, nothing was happening with Dalvin Cook, and I think they should have stayed away from, or they should have been more comfortable moving away from Cook because Cousins was doing okay, and Cook himself was playing all right, but the run blocking just kind of wasn't there at first. But yeah, Brian O'Neill had a pretty poor game as a pass protector. Garrett Bradbury had a pretty poor game as a run blocker, and then Dakota Dozier just had an awful game. I just think that they should just kind of. We said this last show. I said I think Ezra Cleveland's going to be the right guard and Dakota Dozier is going to be the left guard, but I would love it if Ezra Cleveland was the left guard and Brett Jones was the right guard. But I mean, you could switch either of those around, but I just think that Brett Jones should be playing. Instead of Dakota Dozier. That was pretty bad. Kirk Cousins, I think you nailed it. He had moments. He was fine. He had some mistakes. He had some okay plays. I wouldn't credit him for the fumble or anything like that, so I wouldn't be too worried there. But I mean, he made some mistakes, and I think he might have had something close to like a dropped pick or something like that ends up looking a little bit better in the stats. So he should have 2 interceptions instead of 1 or something. But I mean, he had high moments and low moments. I would like to see a little bit more of Jordan Brailford. He had 11 total snaps, but he had 2 pressures that were super impactful. He also had a tackle and he forced a fumble. So that's pretty important. I want to see a little bit more of that. Afadi had a pretty good game. That's worth mentioning. Yeah. Oh, also Jeff Gladney had a really bad PFF grade, but I think he played all right. So yeah, I mean, the Vikings played down to their competition. We knew that was an issue. They'll need to play up to the Bucs, which they're struggling right now, but they're like unquestionably like a better team. And we can just put this game into the memory hole and never talk about it again.
If the Jags are competent in the least, did the Vikings lose this game?
I don't know, maybe. I mean, like again, it was a tie game, right? So you could easily make the argument, but like, I don't know, what does competent mean? Because like they're not talented. It's like, yeah, okay, if they don't make any mistakes, do they win? I don't know. They also aren't talented. Like, what does a mistake-free Jaguars team look like? Probably not that different. But I mean, probably, right? Because if the difference is a single point and they make their extra point, yeah, probably. Although the Vikings would play the end of the half a little bit differently if they're down 4 instead of down 3 or something like that. But still, like, it's. I mean, I bet Cousins takes the throw to Beebe, right? If they're down 1 instead of tied. Yeah, I mean, probably, but I don't know for sure. They're not a very talented team.
Ben Gosling summed up this game best, I feel, over all of Twitter. So I just want to read a little something that Ben Gosling wrote. The Vikings and Jaguars are pursuing a victory with all the assertiveness of two Minnesota drivers trying to figure out whose turn it is to go through an unmetered intersection.
I nailed it.
And that is all I have to say about that game. Let's go over to the mailbag. And the first question is from Kirk for a Reefs Seahawks corner. Is it time to panic after the loss to the Giants, or is this a minor, unconcerning setback?
I'm not a Seahawks guy. I don't have...
But as someone who covers the league now, you are uniquely qualified to answer this Seattle-specific question.
I would look into making adjustments, but the Seahawks are probably fine.
I like that is now my shoehorn for all of the Seahawks stuff now.
I'm so mad.
Fantastic. Thank you, The Athletic. Let's go to Ryan, who asks, are we bad and lucky or good and misunderstood? There is also the third option in which we're just inconsistent as hell.
I would say that they're messy. How about that? Just like messy, like your friend who loves to cause drama.
Fine. I started to have a response, and then I remembered all of the friends I've ever had that just like to cause drama, and I went, no, I don't want to talk about that at all. Okay, I get it. Let's just move on. Damian Barrett asks, in other sports, winning ugly is seen as a sign of a good team. However, in the NFL, or with this Vikings team specifically, I'm not sure. Do you think these performances are something we can build on, or are they papering over some sizable gaps and will ultimately cost us in terms of the draft?
I think this is an interesting question, but I think it's in part because ugly means different things in different sports. So, for example, in soccer, if you win ugly, a lot of that is because you play a defensive style of soccer, and I haven't really paid a ton of attention to soccer in a number of years, but it used to be my favorite sport. But, one of the things that the Italian national team was really known for is that they would score like one goal and then they would turtle, right? In fact, the Italian word for turtle is the name of that strategy. And they played really excellent defensive soccer, and it looked really ugly and it was boring, and it won. I mean, they won a number of World Cups, right? That ended up working out, obviously, in a sustainable way. And then as you kind of develop advanced soccer analytics, you could kind of see, more of the reason as to why, right? Because the Italian team had a high percentage of time where they possessed the ball, thus denying an opportunity for the opposing team to have shots. The number of accurate shots on goal was very low, and its accurate shots on goal differential is is a really great statistic that tells you kind of going forward how good a team will be. And they were remarkable at that statistic because they just denied accurate shots on goal. So that is like one example of how winning ugly is sustainable, because the metrics that determine, or the metrics that measure the most sustainable types of play, are being well represented here. And that could be true in baseball as well. If you've got just like really good pitching, but it's like, and again, I don't know a ton about baseball, but like, let's say you've got a pitcher that pitches to contact really well and relies on fielders to create outs, but forces grounders from players. And I think that's a thing in baseball. Then you've probably got a pretty good fielding unit and a pretty good pitching staff, but it can be kind of ugly. I mean, I guess luckily games will probably take longer, but or will be shorter, I should say. At least games will be shorter. But it can be kind of ugly. You're not hitting dingers or anything like that. You're playing defensive baseball and you're winning, but that's sustainable, right? Because your ERA is not that high. The number of hits you're allowing isn't really all that high. And your like run differential isn't all that bad, all of that stuff, right? So that probably is another pretty good example of winning ugly in another sport. In football, winning ugly is really just because someone else made a mistake, and that's like not really sustainable, right? Luckily, this sounds so dumb. Luckily, a lot of the reasons the Vikings have played ugly is because they've made mistakes. And the reason that's lucky is because despite kind of how cursed the Vikings seem, it is unlikely that these mistakes will continue. I don't think they're going to have that many more fumble sixes. And, I'll eat my words if that happens. Like, I'm sure James will clip this part of the podcast and just send it out to Twitter as soon as it happens. But
literally time stamping it right now.
Yeah, right. But it is pretty unlikely that the Vikings will have additional fumble sixes, right? I don't think that they're going to have too many more plays like the one where the ball bounces off of Chris Boyd's hands and into Laviska Shenault's for a touchdown. Like they got unlucky in ways that don't necessarily continue. And so the fact that the Vikings were in close games is more a product of the Vikings having just awful luck and obviously not being able to put teams away. But like the 2 touchdowns that the Jaguars started with were that pick 6 and the Chris Boyd to Laviska Shenault lateral, essentially. Like, those are the 2 touchdowns they allowed. They did not really allow the Jaguars too much offensive production that was, like, legitimately gained, right? It was 2 freak plays. And so I think kind of going forward, you can say that this team probably played better in that game than the score would indicate. So I think that there's something there to say that the Vikings are better than what it seemed like that game was. But I would say that typically winning ugly in football does represent a kind of play that is unsustainable. And we see that with teams that have a high win rate in close games. Teams that win close games very often tend to regress to the mean, and they tend to end up being like 500 teams in those close games going forward. And which is like one of my issues with Chicago. They were like 5-1 in close. I think they only played close games, right? When they started out 5-1, they're either 5-0 or 5-1 in close games. And the one loss, it was like an 8-point loss, and then the rest of their wins were within 7 points. And I pointed out that this was probably a 500 or worse team as a result of that. And we've seen that, right? So for the Vikings, who 3-2 in close games, I would say that some of the close games they've been in, including these last 2, are not representative of the style of play that gets you to close games. Like, I think they're a better team than that. So I would say that the Vikings are probably better than the 500 team that they are now. But I would say that typically in football, winning ugly is a bad thing. I mean, losing pretty isn't good, right? But like in terms of projecting forward how good a team is going to be, winning ugly is actually pretty representative. Whereas in other sports, you can maintain what is sustainable about positive play in ugly wins.
Yeah, in other sports, especially like basketball, for instance, be like, okay, the team's kind of coming together. The team was able to gut it out. The team was able to, to come together and figure it out and be able to make it. Whereas football, they may have made one less mistake than the other team. And you're just kind of stuck there at that point. So no, I think you're absolutely right on that. Let's go to Luke, who asks, if you could change one thing from the 2020 Vikings, what would be the easiest change you could choose that would have the biggest impact? Example, guarantee everyone hears the same play in the huddle. Stuff that's impactful that we could have reasonably expected.
So Luke and I had a conversation over Twitter last night where we were talking about the pick 6 and why it happened. And I had called it a screen at one point, and somebody else a couple hours before that had told me it wasn't a screen. And I am a little confused about it because I think that it is maybe not a screen, but the biggest issue here is that Garrett Bradbury swings out as if it's a screen. And he's still behind the line of scrimmage, but he swings out and he's out in the flat as if he's going to block for a screen. And Kirk Cousins throws it to Dalvin Cook as if it were a screen. But obviously, it wasn't a screen, and CJ Ham was open on the wheel route. You ended up getting tagged in that, James. And the best throw was probably deep to CJ Ham. Of all things, CJ Ham had an angle on the wheel route, and he threw up the mailbox. He was like, "I'm open." Which is just the audacity. I love it.
The idea that he would get that throw to him, like just of all people,
just running deep down the sideline.
Of all people to get, you would expect Zimmer to have the ball thrown to him before CJ Ham in that position.
You're right, but that was probably the best throw, and he throws it to Dalvin Cook, and that was obviously a miscommunication. So. Did they all hear the same play in the huddle? Because Garrett Bradbury and Kirk Cousins thought one thing, a lot of the offense thought another thing.
CJ
Okay.
Ham sitting there going, "This is my Sports Center moment." Everybody
Yeah,
loves
right.
everybody loves big guy touchdowns.
All right, Kubiak called my play.
Well, I don't
Ready.
know if they still do it because I didn't buy the newest edition of Madden. But what they used to do is on Madden you could choose like player specific plays in the for what you wanted to run, and some like this is clearly like this is their route. This is the thing that you would be playing for them. It's not that you couldn't throw to other people, but this is like specifically for them. Yep, it's time to call the one CJ Ham play in here that's not a like a halfback ISO. Like we're just gonna go, we're gonna run him streaks. Like we're just gonna run him 4 vertical right now. It'll be fantastic. The audacity of CJ Ham.
So yeah, so for this thing, it would like, I mean, obviously, like the best answer would be like replace Kirk Cousins with like, I guess Josh Allen, right? But with like Russell Wilson or Aaron Rodgers, like yeah, that would be the thing. But like actionable and reasonable, you can't do that. So the Vikings never turn the ball over. Well, that's a little bit too pie in the sky. You can't really wish for that. This is a hard question because the parameters are so rough, but you can kind of tell what's an unrealistic ask. You can't be like, well, they no longer fumble. Like, well, I mean, teams fumble, right? Like, you can't just say they no longer fumble. So, like, what is it? Luke kind of basically said no more miscommunication without saying it, right? They all hear the same play. I don't know. It would probably just be run an analytically sound offense. Like, I feel like that's actionable, right? Like, you throw it a little bit more often on 1st and 10. You don't have to throw it every time on 1st and 10. Throw it a little bit more often on 2nd and short. Throw it a little bit more often on 2nd and long. Mix up your runs and passes on 2nd and short. Run a little bit more often on 3rd and short. Run a little bit more at the goal line. Engage in a little bit more play action. Engage in a little bit more motion at the snap. You know, run a more analytically sound offense. It doesn't have to be like the nerd's dream spreadsheet offense, but it should be a lot of these things that we know Cousins is good at, that we know the Vikings can use. Probably run more 11 personnel, even though 11 personnel was not working for them at the beginning of the season, and their offense seems to be good now. I would wager that if they ran just a little bit more 11 personnel, it would make the offense just a little bit more efficient, especially with the injuries that Irv Smith seems to have. So, yeah, I would say design the offense to be just a little bit more analytically sound. It doesn't have to be you always throw it on 1st and 10. It doesn't have to be you always throw it on 2nd and 10 or 2nd and short. You're not always running it at the goal line, but you're tweaking the balance a little bit just so that it kind of matches what tends to be the more efficient play. Run play action when it seems to be effective. Run on 1st and 10, every time you throw, make it a play action play. Make every play on 1st and 10 look like it's a run. I'm fine with that unless you're trailing by like 20 points, right? Like, I think that for the most part, if you can threaten a run on 1st and 10, you should. So it would be along those lines.
Because I harp on the special teams people all the time, I'm going to continue to do so at this particular moment. What about just having a positive punt return yard rate at the end of the game? Like, can we get that? Because I think this one turned out negative as well. I don't think that's too much to ask. I don't think it'll swing a game.
I don't. In this game, was the punt return net positive? It might have been. Let's see. Yeah, Osborne ended up with 21 yards in punt returns, and I think he only had one penalty for -10. So he netted 11 yards on 4 attempted punts, right? So, I mean, that's not beautiful, but it is technically positive.
It is technically positive. Good.
Yeah, I would say you could even up your ask to be just a league average punt return team, because I saw who was it, Andre Roberts today for the Bills. I saw him return it like 15 yards, and I was like, "That's magical! Holy crap! Look at him go!"
That's allowed.
He forced a missed tackle and he kept running. I am losing my mind. Like, it was just like, what happened, man? I used to watch the best return team in the NFL. Like, not too long ago either. Like, it was like 4 years ago, right? It was the best return team in the NFL, both kick and punts and kicks and punts combined. And Now I'm just like, wow, 15 yards. That is nifty. Man, what the Vikings could do with 15 yards.
Man, those are some dangerous thoughts right there. Matthew asks, cover two for a while was thought of as a solved coverage. And as much as the Vikings aren't great in the back seven, they seem to be holding up well. Is there a specific wrinkle to cover two that Zim is putting in, or is it just the coverage that the coverage asks for average cornerback play with elite safety play?
So I would say that it is heading in the right direction, but still not correct to say it's a solved coverage. I don't think that there are really, of the fundamental coverages in the NFL, I don't think there are any that are solved. The issue is that coverages come and go based off of the talent available in the league and the offensive style of play that we see. And as those change, what coverages are dominant can change as well. One of the reasons that Tampa 2 was so popular early on and so effective, I should say, was because you had a really good interior pass rush available to you. So people like Warren Sapp, right? And you had freak middle linebackers that had the ability to play, essentially play deep safety or run up to the line of scrimmage. Like, as much as Brian Urlacher might be kind of overrated, one of his really remarkable things, and he was like basically purpose built from the beginning because he was a hybrid safety at, was it New Mexico? He played the Lobo position, which is the star position in some other college defenses. And he ran like a 4.4 40 at he was basically Anthony Barr, but without being as tall. Just an incredible, athlete. And the Buccaneers had that, and the Colts had that, and the Bears had that, and that was really important and effective. And then you also had, cover two corners that were really physical. They didn't need to be as tall or as lanky because they weren't doing a ton of the deep sideline stuff that you now see from cover three and cover one teams, like, with Seattle with Brandon Brown or Richard Sherman, right? And so the talent available to you allowed you to be able to run these cover two systems that had some pretty high level safeties, that had some really incredible middle linebackers. And they needed to be that athletic because they needed to be able to carry deep routes up the middle and prevent some of the problems with cover two when they kind of tried to flood these deep zones. That you now had another linebacker that had the ability to kind of resolve some of these concerns and prevent any range issues that were coming up from your safeties. So that was part of it. And then also, the tight ends in the middle 2000s were just not good enough to challenge some of these linebackers. And so you didn't have some of the ways that people attacked cover two. Well, as kind of time went on, you end up having tight ends that have the ability to challenge the seam really well. People like Vernon Davis, for example, did a really excellent, he ran like a 4.35 at 250 pounds. It's just one of the best athletes to ever test the combine, right? So you had the ability to really challenge some of these linebackers. Plus, these linebackers weren't getting replaced, right? Like Urlacher wasn't getting replaced. Quentin Corliss, I think is what his name was, or something Corliss in Indianapolis, was not getting replaced. Plus, some of the guys that could run that fast just could not play linebacker. Like guys essentially like Shaq Thompson early in his career for the Panthers just wouldn't hit that hard and would not be able to fill against the run. And so you ended up with the type of linebacker talent that couldn't keep up, plus these mismatches that ended up kind of invalidating a lot of what was happening with the cover two. Plus, the quarterbacks were getting a little bit in terms of the quarterbacks were improving their arm strength, and so you could hit the corner route and run smash a little bit more often, which was kind of a cover two beater. And so there are these things that you could do, and so coverages evolved past that. Cover three right now is quote unquote a solved coverage. A lot of teams are trying to run cover three, and that means the types of corners that can play cover three, they're not available to every team. There's just not enough Richard Shermans to go around, and a bunch of people want these long, lanky corners that have the ability to shut down these deep sideline passes that don't have to be that fast because they've got the additional height to kind of make up for it. But not everyone plays as intelligently as Sherman does. And so when they're drafting players like Stanley Jean-Baptiste, I think in the second round or something crazy like that, you're getting these corners that you're overrating because of their physical traits, because you need them for the scheme, but everybody is trying to get the same corner. And so all of these corners get pushed up in the draft, and you're getting less and less talented corners to try and do a lot of the same things. Plus, you probably need a guy like Earl Thomas to be able to pull it off. And obviously, there's not that many Earl Thomases. So cover 3 has been dying in the league for a little bit while, and the Vikings were actually ahead of the trend with cover 4, which is, 2 deep safeties and 2 deep corners. And because the corners had a much smaller area or a much smaller zone to have to defend, they didn't have to have the kind of length and range that a lot of the cover 3 corners did, because they're not covering as much space. Plus, the coverage calls allow them to kind of be a little bit more adaptable in what they do. And so that's what the Vikings were doing. And Anthony Harris is like an elite cover 4 safety because he does a really good job of kind of nailing the crossing routes and the over routes that are traditionally used to beat cover 4. Well, the Vikings lost the cornerback talent to be able to play cover 4, and so now they're playing cover 2 because it doesn't require as much coverage capability from the corners. But if your guys can hit hard and tackle well, they'll thrive in a cover 2 system. And it turns out that Cameron Dantzler and Jeff Gladney are pretty good at that thing. So they don't have to cover deep as often. And then you have elite safeties that have the range and the capability to kind of cover. So I wouldn't say that anything is solved. It's just what are the offensive trends? What are the types of offenses people are running? What are the matchups they can create? What are the defensive types of talent that you have available to you? And that's what drives defensive and offensive trends in the NFL a lot more than, this is solved, this is not. So I would say that the Vikings are bringing back cover 2 in a sense, in part to cover up their defensive deficiencies. But now everyone is used to beating cover 3. And that was one of the issues that Zimmer had early in last year, is running a lot of cover 3. And he just got sick of all these offenses that were designed to beat the cover 3 because Seattle had done it and Carolina had done it in 2015. And there were 2 versions of cover 3 that were really popular and effective. Well, now, they're kind of beating up on the Vikings cover 3. He changes to a cover 4 and that's become effective. So, the way that offenses are designed, like a lot of sail routes to flood the sidelines, or 4 verts, or any of those things that kind of beat cover 3, a lot of those don't really work against cover 2 because you've got players just in different spots. And so offenses have to change their tendencies in order to be a little bit more effective beating cover 2. So I wouldn't say that any of these coverages are ever solved. It's just the cycles that you go through kind of change what's available to you.
Next question is from Raul, who asks, it seems like wide receiver talent is outpacing cornerback talent league-wide. Good corners can't cover good wide receivers. While analytics suggest that coverage is more important than pass rush, does this talent gap suggest that investing in pass rush is the better approach?
I think it actually suggests the opposite. And I know why you would think the first thing, but it suggests the opposite because the difference between the best corners and the worst corners is wider when there's less talent available to you in the league. If everybody is a good pass rusher, why would you invest in pass rush? Like, if there's so many good pass rushers, they should theoretically cost less, or your replacement level pass rusher should not be that far removed from your high level pass rushers. Whereas if there's just not a ton of cornerback talent, the really good corners are actually exceedingly rare compared to their competition. So I would say this actually even more strongly suggests that coverage matters more. But it's not just that. The mechanics of how an offensive play works also suggest that. So it's not even just the talent differential that drives this. It's that if a pass rush is good, you can counter it by throwing quicker. And if a pass rush is bad, theoretically, you can counter good coverage by having them wait longer. But it turns out that being able to cover a receiver for 1 to 2 seconds and forcing the quarterback to go through the reads enables the pass rush more than a quick pass rush enables the coverage, especially because if you've got poor coverage, you don't have the ability to beat those short routes. So mechanically, it just happens to matter more. And then in addition to that, it seems like good pass rushers are a little bit more widely available. So the best corners are harder to find and are rarer, and therefore create a bigger difference over a replacement level corner. So it actually suggests the opposite.
Next question is from Kyle Slaby, who asks, do they really distrust Kirk, or do they really think that a running back getting 32 carries for 120 yards is effective offensive strategy?
So Mark Craig at the Star Tribune fielded a question 2 hours before recording today on Twitter, where he basically where someone was like, but the yards per carry is going down, and Mark Craig responded, wins per game is going up. And that is an attitude I really strongly disagree with. But I think it's the attitude that the Vikings have about this. Well, we're winning, right? So I would say that I don't think it's that they distrust Kirk. I just think that they think winning football is to run the ball. And it's not like they've necessarily been proven wrong this year. I mean, like I would argue that, you can point to games where they have been proven wrong. But I think for the most part, they would say, well, when we're running the ball well, we win. And it's like, well, yeah, okay, I guess. But when you throw the ball well, you win too. And guess what? Like that's going to happen a little bit more often. So, yeah, I would say that it's not that they distrust Kirk. I think they distrust the concept of passing.
They just distrust everything. That's not
Yeah.
the run. Let's go to Ryan, who asks, most exciting rookie this season, non-Jefferson category, and least exciting rookie, say over Lynch level of snaps.
Yeah, so the most exciting rookie non-Jefferson category is easily Cameron Dantzler. It would be nice if he had gotten a couple more games, and obviously that pick helps. I wrote in Chad and I's regrading the draft piece that Jeff Gladney has played better than Cameron Dantzler thus far, but I think that Cameron Dantzler is going to be a better long-term corner, and I wrote that before the game, so I feel really good about it now. I think that he's just really fascinating and phenomenal and fun to watch. And I think that he's got a lot of the tools to be a really excellent high level corner. And given the jumps that cornerbacks in the Zimmer system have made in year 3, I'm really excited to see kind of what happens for him if he's playing this well in year 1. I was definitely wrong about him coming out of the draft. So that's really exciting to kind of just see somebody just kind of, I don't know, kind of like be better than that, right? Like, oh my God, his film in college was so good. And I'm like, I don't know about that. The data suggests that maybe he's not that good. And it turns out, in this case, you probably want to just trust the film. He played really well, and he's continued to play well in the NFL.
Kenneth Allen asks, what do the various tracking sites have for Jefferson on drops? It seems like he's good to drop at least one catchable pass a game.
I think that's driven more by just the past 2 games and the drops coming in kind of high leverage situations. So the drop rate that's cited most often is Pro Football Focus. And his drop rate is not so bad, kind of given the number of catchable passes he's received. So PFF says he's had 4 drops for a drop rate of 6.2%. That's 61st out of 105 receivers in terms of most drops. So it's better to be lower on this list. Or if you want to turn it the other way around, he ranks 53rd best, right? So he's slightly above average in drop rate of receivers who have had at least 20% of 125 targets, whatever that is. I guess 25. Duh. So his drop rate at Pro Football Focus, his total drops 4. If you take a look at Sport Radar and their advanced stats, which you can find at Pro Football Reference. So Sport Radar you have to pay for. Pro Football Reference has a lot of their data. They only have 2 drops for Justin Jefferson. So his drop rate for them is 2.4%. And so that ranks 96th of the 153, and that includes running backs, receivers, and tight ends. Or the other way around, 58th of the 153. So that's obviously really high level, but they only have 2 for him. Interestingly, they have Adam Thielen with one of the highest drop rates, 14th highest in the NFL at 8%. Where these other organizations don't have Thielen with as a high of a drop rate. Like Pro Football Focus only has 4 for Thielen. And then the other charting organization that I looked at was Sports Info Solutions, and I wasn't able to get like all 100 or whatever receivers, but I was able to get essentially their top 40 receivers. And so for them, I found that they had Justin Jefferson with 2 drops and Adam Thielen with 3 drops. So they kind of split the difference between the 2. So yeah, 2 of the charting organizations have Jefferson with 2 drops. They obviously probably happened in the last 2 games, whereas the third one, Sport Radar, has Jefferson with like 4. Or no. PFF has them with 4. That's it. And the difference here is what gets regarded as a catchable ball, whether or not drops count on contested catches, what counts as a contested catch, and so on. I would say that we're just kind of over remembering the past 2 games. And I would say that he probably has more than 2 drops, honestly. But it's not very high, whatever his drop rate really is.
Krishna asks, if it were up to you, Arif, would you have kept Stefanski over Zimmer? And how has Kubiak's play calling differed from his, and what are the stats showing on who may be better? It's kind of a lot there.
Yeah, so I won't be able to go into all of it. I'm sure I'll be able to write an article on this later. But I would have kept Zimmer, which, maybe that turns out to be wrong. I mean, Stefanski's doing a pretty good job in Cleveland, although I will say that it's kind of deceptive. I mean, they have a negative point differential. But 9-3 is pretty good. This is kind of the winning uglier thing, right? I think that Stefanski's success is unsustainable, but I'll say I'm really excited for what he's done, and I think it'll be kind of interesting if he kind of proves the Vikings, quote unquote, proves them wrong, or proves the Browns right. But I would have kept Zimmer, and it's beginning to look like I'm wrong, and whatever. But I think that the differences that we're seeing in play calling is that we are seeing a higher proportion of passes. I mean, the Vikings are throwing the ball more under Kubiak, but that was kind of inevitable. They are running a little bit more 11 personnel. That was kind of inevitable. They're running a lot more empty, which I'm really surprised by. Kubiak doesn't really always strike me as the throw out an empty guy, but he's been doing that a lot. And they've been doing play action a lot less, which also surprises me. And I would say some of these are fine. Like, I think more empty is fine. I just think that they need to handle protections a little bit better. Less play action to me is not fine. And the play action itself is a little bit less effective. So Cousins is still throwing better under play action from a yards per attempt and a passer rating standpoint than he is without play action, but he's not nearly as consistent. And so his completion percentage under play action has dropped. And it's really all just explosive plays. Whereas last year he was better in almost every kind of facet on play action versus non-play action. So that's part of it. But the play action design, I think, is better. Like, under Stefanski, it was almost all bootlegs. And when we saw defenses key in on that, like Green Bay, like the 49ers, it got really ugly really fast. Whereas for the Vikings, they're not all bootlegs, and the play action design can do a little bit more to kind of protect Cousins. Some of the toss action without the bootleg, which they scored 2 touchdowns on the last 2 weeks, I like seeing that. I mean, it's very clearly kind of like a goal line specific play that they run, but it's a pretty good play, and it's kind of cool. So they've got a larger diversity of runs available to them. They don't just run wide zone or duo. They run a variety of different kind of runs, and they do a lot of like more pin and pull type stuff or tackle counter type stuff. Really kind of cool. But yeah, I mean, there are some differences tactically with what they do. There are some differences strategically with what they do. But as a head coach, I mean, Stefanski is doing a really remarkable job. I just want to see how much more sustainable that is for them, because that negative point differential kind of worries me. That said, in Buffalo, Sean McDermott is a really good coach, and their first year that they got to the playoffs, they had a negative point differential, and they were able to kind of, whatever it was, turn that into something positive. So maybe having wins and a negative point differential is the sign of a good coach. I'm skeptical. I think it's just mostly a sign of good luck, but we've got at least one data point to suggest that maybe it's the sign of a good coach. So we'll kind of see, but I think there are some signs to be worried about the Browns.
Ojibwe Pun asks, will the playoff win over the Saints be even more absurd than the recent regular season wins?
I mean, obviously.
It has to.
Guaranteed. Yeah.
I can't wait to see how that playoff win happens.
Yeah.
That's the only thing, is that the Saints are ranked are currently number 1 in the NFC. Be like, no, that's not sustainable. That has to change, because the Vikings aren't going to get another playoff game.
Yeah, unless they play the Saints. Yeah.
Exactly. This has to change. Like this whole Saints at number 1 thing with the bye. No, that's not something that we can do. Chris asks Arifa a wonderful question here. Would you trade Danielle Hunter to the Lions, where he makes outside of the top 10 for defensive ends for the rest of his career and knows that you are to blame for this and how to find you, for a top 5 interior offensive line for 5 years.
First of all, I wouldn't do that anyway, and just the added like implied threat of him being mad at me makes it even more clear that I shouldn't do it. But no, I don't think that you trade Danielle Hunter for a top 5 interior offensive line, because I think a top 5 interior offensive line is overrated. I like watching teams that have really good offensive interior lines. Take a look at the Browns, for example, with the top 2 guards in the NFL. Which, yeah, how much of that is Stefanski, how much of that is Callahan, how much of that is just the talent that they've acquired? Because Joe Bitonio was good before they arrived, but Wyatt Teller was not. And I like watching, the Buccaneers. They've got a really good interior offensive line. But I don't think that what kind of drives how good they are has a lot to do with that so much as kind of everything else around it. So I would say that it'd be better to have a premier pass rusher contribute to high-level pass rush than it would be to guarantee a top 5 interior offensive line. That said, the other caveat to this question is, hey, the Vikings are so good at identifying edge talent that they might be able to replace Danielle Hunter, to which I would say that's kind of hubristic, and I would not be so comfortable saying that. And second, yeah, they might be really good at identifying edge talent, but that doesn't mean they're good at doing it on command, right? Like they've been trying to draft edge defenders in the middle rounds like nearly every single year. And sometimes it works out, not even always the middle rounds, sometimes the late rounds like Weatherly and Odenabo, and sometimes not, right? Like, and so what if the next 2 that they draft are Stephen Weatherly and Scott Crichton? Like, well, great. Like, it's the same evaluation core, but now all you've got are DJ Wanham and Ifeadi Odenabo, or Ifeadi Odenabo. Like, that's not good enough. So I would say that while there is a chance that you could stumble into a Brian Robinson or an Everson Griffin or a Danielle Hunter, maybe, I would imagine that it's more likely than not that you're going to end up with probably a surprising starter. I mean, they've outpaced their draft slot, generally speaking. Like even Stephen Weatherly, who I thought was kind of overhyped by Vikings fans for a little bit, has very clearly outpaced his draft slot. No question. You got a second contract. Like he's outpaced his draft slot. And so the Vikings nailed it there. They nailed it with Ifeadi, even though it took a while and a couple of cuts. They nailed it, obviously, with Danielle Hunter. It looks like they've hit it with DJ Wanham. I think it's very likely he outplays his draft slot. So, they're good at it, but that doesn't mean they'll get a top 5 level talent. And so I would say that having Danielle Hunter available to you, plus not having to spend that 3rd round pick or whatever it is you would use to get a high level edge talent, is going to be more valuable to you than that top 5 interior offensive line. And then on top of that, I very much value like my physical well-being, and implied in this question is that Danielle Hunter will like seek me out and make me pay retribution for the fact that he, for some reason, can't get a good contract in Detroit.
Yeah, that is a terrifying prospect to be sure. That's
there's not a fight. I could home alone this house for 5 straight years in anticipation of it. There's no way I would survive.
Or you'd probably end up doing it to yourself at that point. So
I mean that's true too. But even if I did the perfect Macaulay Culkin treatment to the house, I think Danielle Hunter would just overcome it.
Beef Brewski asks a question for James's Theology Corner. Which is great
because it's getting out of control. I love it.
Now that we know James is a wise theologian and ordained minister, if you could anoint with oil and heal a single injured Vikings player, who would you choose and why? Let's say through divine revelation, Kendricks is back next week. Couple things with this particular question. Obviously, it's
pretty
Danielle.
Straightforward. I don't see what the issue is.
It's obviously going to be Danielle Hunter. Next, I like how this is said, despite the fact that, no, I said I was not an ordained minister for that, but I actually am. I have done weddings.
What, through like the Church of Life or whatever?
Yeah, Universal
thing?
Life Church. Yeah, I have married. So you're an
ordained minister.
Yes,
and obviously a wise theologian based off of your answers to these questions.
Yes, I have married a number of people. I actually did it a lot in Minneapolis when I was DJing weddings down there. It was actually like one of the service
DJ/minister. Was that on your business card?
It should have been at that point, but it was the service we were offering because it it was one less thing you had to worry about paying an officiant. You were it was just part.
So did you specialize in elopers?
No, not even close. These were weddings.
Running your own Vegas chapel?
No. I was going from village to dell, setting up, whether it be the Egan Community Center, which I always thought was lovely, or a couple of other locations. I ended up in
traveling
Shoreview
salesman of ordained ministers.
It was not some sort of a snake oil thing at all. One day,
it was more like an Arthur Miller thing, right? Like
much more of an Arthur Miller situation. Absolutely, it was more Mank than anything. Yeah, it was just. No, I DJ. So as a quick aside, I DJ'd weddings for 17 years, from January of 2000 until very August, September, maybe October of 2017. And I only quit because I started to lose my hearing. And I was getting a bit tired of it, admittedly. But I DJ'd for a long period of time there. And when I was living in the cities, it was my income, because all the recording studios had closed down immediately after I graduated from college. I was like, okay, well, right when I graduated from college, it was like the housing market died. And all the studios started losing their money because all these people had studios open because they thought it was cool to have a recording studio. And all of a sudden they couldn't pay their bills, and all of a sudden they started closing up shop. It was like no recording studios existed in Minneapolis for a brief period of time there. Well, they existed, but the hobby studios all closed. So all of this ends up happening.
2 years later, you took on an unpaid gig to produce a podcast.
It's closer to 4, but not the point. Point of the story. Point of the story is I was DJing. I was working at a company based out of, I believe, Eden Prairie, and I was actually helping manage the company at the time. And I did a number of gigs, including my favorite one. I've probably told this story on the show. I DJ'd a wake at one point. I did that.
You probably have, and I don't remember this at all. What?
I DJ'd a wake. That is a thing that I did. But I did a number of weddings.
No, we got to ask. Did you choose the music, or did they choose it for you?
They chose the music. I could have just set up a computer with a playlist and just hit play, but I wanted to say that I DJ'd a wake. So we waived my fee because I was one of the managers of the thing, and I was training people in. I knew I was easily the number one or number two guy there. So
you brought your trainee in on the wake?
Yep. I don't even remember being paid for it. I remember them paying for like the equipment rental and making sure, like, I was making sure the mic worked. For them, I made sure that the music was played at a respectable volume, and made sure that all the music worked.
Triple check that you didn't have a wedding playlist up. Like,
exactly.
No one plays Celebrate.
I'm not playing ABBA's Dancing Queen or Get Up, Get On Up by James Brown in the middle of this wake. It wasn't something I was going to do, but it was also not an Irish wake, so it was just a wake. But I had DJ'd a wake, but I DJ'd weddings in the cities for a number of years. And had a blast, and I ended up in Shoreview an unfortunate amount of times. There was a lot of times I ended up over at this one country club out in Shoreview, out on the lake. It was a gorgeous place, easy to get in and out of, but I just kept. It felt like I was being booked there and the Egan Community Center all the time. And I believe it was the Egan Community Center because it just had these long glass, like these very tall glass walls. That was also I did a wedding at the Egan Community Center on September 11th, and there was I'm saying there wasn't a bet, but in the back of my head, I had this thought. I wonder if it was a military wedding, and I just had this this question of whether or not somebody was going to invoke 9/11 in the Bachelor in the speech by the best man. And it was as horrifying as you can possibly imagine.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that was my worry too. Okay,
I just sat there going, really? That's because I got really good at figuring out what was coming as far as the best man speech was concerned. And that one went a little long and awful. But I DJ'd a ton of weddings, and I did a whole mess of ceremonies. And I did the actual ceremony itself for a number of couples that are presumably divorced in the cities now.
Presumably, the numbers would suggest a good percentage of them are divorced.
Exactly. A large number of them are likely divorced. When I'm thinking back of my friends who I've DJ'd for that got married, a number of them are still married, but the ones I have like looked up over the years, or my email had them listed, so they ended up like populating into like Facebook or whatever, and I check, I wonder if they're still, nope, that is single as hell, aren't you? Like it's a thing. So back to the question, Daniil Hunter, and yes, I actually am an ordained minister through the Universal Life Church. I actually had paid enough money at one point to be listed as a deacon.
A deacon? What does that get you? What are the perks of being a deacon?
It really just means you have a nicer certificate and you can call yourself deacon. That's really the only thing, but I thought it was funny enough that I used a part of my tip money on that. So go me. Ian Pauly asks, why is there hesitation to try Jones at left guard? Is it due to them being staunchly against him playing guard unless he absolutely has to? Technical changes from right to left that might be a difficult transition, or does Dozier just have something incriminating on the coach?
I think that they're very happy with how familiar Dozier is with the line calls and the protections. I think that they think that Brett Jones is just unsustainable at guard. I think they're concerned about his size and his length. I think that they're a little stubborn about this, and I think that they just don't think Brett Jones is as talented as Dozier. I disagree with them on all accounts, by the way. But like, they cut Brett Jones at the beginning of the last 2 years, right? Like they clearly don't think he's as good as Dakota Dozier. So that's part of it. But yeah, I mean, Brett Jones was the best offensive lineman against the Panthers by like a good amount. And I would say that Dakota Dozier was significantly the worst Viking in this game. Like not even offensive lineman, like the worst Viking. And remember, I just spent like 20 minutes blasting Todd Davis and Troy Dye. I don't think that playing Brett Jones would be a disaster. And I think that is not a disaster. It's a pretty significant upgrade over Dakota Dozier. So I disagree with them. I think that they have reasons. I would say that it's not like random, but I don't quite know what those reasons are, but I imagine they have to do with just the exceeding amount of familiarity Dozier has with the offense, potentially chemistry concerns, although I would not be that concerned about chemistry if I were them, just because they keep on changing offensive linemen anyway. And concerns about like the way he holds up and size and stuff like that.
Next question is from Don from Ohio, who asks, instead of talking about the game which caused permanent mental health issues to those who watched it, let's ask this. They just upgraded to a Costco executive membership, and the fiancé and I feel very privileged by this. What act of privilege should we act out to consummate this glorious accomplishment?
I love the Costco membership. I don't know, like that is a very savvy purchase. I think the executive membership is like twice as much in terms of cost, but I think you more than make up for it, not just on the discounts that you get and the additional discounts that executive members get, but you also get 2% back. I know all of this because we have a Costco membership, and I have considered upgrading to the executive membership. We just don't go to Costco often enough for us to be able to activate all the rewards of the executive membership. But you can get up to $1,000 back. We're not sponsored by Costco, by the way. But you can get up to $1,000 back in the executive membership. That pays itself.
Think about how much charcoal you could get on the cheap.
They do sell charcoal. Plus, I mean, if you're going to have multiple cards, the executive membership costs just as much as 2 cards from the Gold Star membership. So might as well. So I don't know if that's like an insanely privileged thing. I mean, obviously it costs $120 and be able to pay that up front is, not a luxury everybody has available to them, but it's a pretty wise thing. And Costco treats its employees better than almost any other company on the planet. So, that's good stuff.
Dude, so I'm unfamiliar with the ways of the Costco somehow. I just haven't found my way in one. I think that the best way to celebrate this is to get a whole mess of the hot dogs and just eat them in the parking lot of a Sam's Club and just lorded over them as people walk by.
That's certainly one way to celebrate. I would celebrate by just getting a bunch of those like really nice like shrink wrapped meats that they have. Like they sell like whole tenderloins, right? If you're really into celebrating how privileged it must be to have a Costco executive membership, go all in and get some of those fancy like vacuum sealed meats or whatever.
Yeah, you can put them on the charcoal grill. It'd be fantastic.
I was waiting for you to do that.
I saw it and I took the opening. Nolan asks, question for Reef's niche football league corner. How worried are you about CFL Grey Cup hero and legend of my Blue Bombers, Chris Stevler, a.k.a. Taysom Hill Light, ruining the Vikings' chance at a wild card spot with the Cardinals?
It'd be perfect because Chris Stevler is indeed a former Gopher as well as a former University of South Dakota football player. And as I was looking him up for this question, because this is what you all make me do, I found out he is the CFL rushing touchdowns co-leader of 2019, in addition to the 2019 Grey Cup champion. He became the first quarterback to start a CFL game coming out of college since 1994, when future CFL Hall of Famer Anthony Calvillo started for the Las Vegas Posse, evidently a Canadian Football League team. I guess I am worried that the quarterback who happens to be the rushing touchdowns co-leader of the CFL and has made it onto the roster of the Arizona Cardinals can exact karmic revenge against the state of Minnesota after having left the University of Minnesota because he wasn't getting playing time or whatever, I guess. He'll replace Kyler Murray, and they're both running quarterbacks, so you can definitely run the same offense with both of them.
Yeah, there's no difference at all between the two of them, really. Maybe like an inch or two, but...
Yeah. I mean, he is also short, but I mean, Kyler Murray is a child. So, I mean, there's like a huge difference, right? He'll win the final game for the Cardinals and the Vikings will lose. It'll be Chris Stevler's fault. Obviously, I don't sound that worried. Yeah. I mean, it is perfect in a lot of ways, but like, come on.
So
Chris Stevler, I've seen this guy play.
Final question from Nolan and final question for the episode. Question for James's Clown Corner. Was this game more of a horror clown a la Pennywise or more of a traditional kid's birthday party clown? I'm going with a Jack Nicholson Joker here. Both hilarious and homicidal.
Oh, there you go. That's good.
That is pretty good. Actually, if I was going to compare this to like a horror thing, this game really, especially about the ending, really felt more like that scene in Devil's Rejects at the very end of the movie when Freebird plays, and you know what's about to happen, but you can't turn away. Like you're just stuck at this point. You just kind of have to sit and watch how this is going to go. Freebird is about to start blasting. Like, oh no. Yep. This is going to go poorly, isn't it? Oh, yep, there's a Dan Bailey miss. Oh, we're just going to keep going with this. And then, when it's actually over, you're like, "Oh my god, I'm done. I can get up and be done with this. I don't have to sit and watch." Oh, this is fantastic. Wonderful. I'm not sure on clown though. I think the Nicholson one is pretty spot on though.
Yeah, no, that one's pretty good.
All right, that is going to be it for this episode of Norse Code. Hope you have enjoyed it. For our Patreon folks, the bonus episode will be coming out on Thursday. Also, I have a mountain of envelopes here for the Patreon folks. There are a number of wonderful things in here if you had requested to get the swag from us. So there's a couple of nice trinkets. Some of the there are a couple of like little things in here that are kind of cool, including there are some. They say there's koozies, but there are what's the word I'm looking for? You put a drink on them in order to not have it
Coasters?
Be on your table. Thank you. There's actually two different sets of coasters. One is from the New York show, and one is also from the Seattle show. So just just letting you know it's just not like a random coaster. It's these are two things here. So, but we got a whole mess of random gear, and there is a Josh Freeman card in here as well. That is just the fact that it exists is kind of an affront to God, but we have it in here for you, the Norse Code listener. So, Arif, let's plug your work.
So you can find it over at theathletic.com/author/Arif-Hassan. I've got a piece coming up, obviously, the Players of the Week piece. I have chosen not to write a recap of this game because I suspect people don't want to read it, and I don't want to write about it. So instead, I'm going to be writing a Bucks preview, which is going to be good information to have as I take on your live questions on our Patreon show later this week. And then I'm also going to do a piece on the Steelers and whether or not they're real. And I was assigned this piece last week, and now it's like way less interesting that they've lost to Washington. But I'm still going to write it and talk about kind of what the warning signs are for why the Steelers are not a very good 11-0, or I guess 11-1 team. It would have been way better if they were a 12-0 team, because then I could write about all their disappointing performances. But now it's just going to be like, yeah, good job. You find out that they were bad right after they lost. So we'll see about that. But that's over at The Athletic. Probably getting published Thursday. We'll see.
All right. And as Arif did mention, we have our live show. That'll be the next thing that comes out from us. So Thursday, December 10th, 7 p.m. Central U.S. time, we will be doing the live show. So we will be answering your question in the mailbag. We'll be doing the full preview and everything. Arif will actually be his own guest, talking about the Bucks. So we will be having that for you Thursday at 7. But until then, for Arif, my name is James. Thank you guys so much for listening, and please remember that all things truly are possible through the power of Ben DiNucci. And we will be back for the live show on Thursday. Norse Code is the largest and only division of Norse Code LLC. You can find Norse Code on the Daily Norseman, SB Nation's official Vikings blog, at dailynorseman.com. You can also find it on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Stitcher, or wherever fine podcasts are aggregated. Our Vikings blogger extraordinaire and generally useful human is Arif Hassan, and he can be found on Twitter at Arif Hassan NFL. You can also find his written work at theathletic.com. I am your podcast host and producer, and my name is James Pagashnik. You can find me at the show's official Twitter feed at NorseCodeDN or my personal account at BigMono. If you'd like to donate a few bucks to the show, you can make your one-time donation at paypal.me/NorseCode, or you can make a recurring monthly contribution by visiting patreon.com/NorseCode. A donation of $3.50 per month does get you bonus material from the show and much more. Any questions or comments that won't fit in a tweet can be sent to norsecodepodcast@gmail.com. On behalf of the Norse Code staff, we thank you so much for listening.
Our formula is this. We go out, we hit people in the mouth.